This is my webcam. It used to look like this. No offense to this one, but it's a little boring. Most webcams follow the same basic design. You have a lens in the front, a couple of microphones, a way of attaching it to the top of your screen, and then maybe a way of mounting it to a tripod or something like that. But it is a camera after all, and cameras have a really long history of industrial design. You have some really interesting and famous camera designs, and I thought, why not take inspiration from some of those famous cameras and spruce up what a webcam looks like? So that's exactly what I did. I disassembled a webcam and rebodied the electronics in a new 3D printed body modeled after the famous Canon AE1 35mm camera, retaining all of the functionality of the original webcam, just in the 1970s styling of the AE1, just in miniature of course. The whole process began with the teardown. I followed a guide on iFixit, which is linked in the description. I wanted to be as non-destructive as possible, although I really only needed to get two things out of the original webcam: the electronics, obviously, and the little mount that it uses to attach to the top of the screen. The strange desire I have to preserve the original plastic body that I really should just throw away came to bite me in the butt later on when I broke the USB connector. And if you stumbled on this video looking for a how-to for this webcam disassembly, be sure to take a lot of care with that connector as it is incredibly fragile. When I tried to remove that USB connector, the socket came with it. It has incredibly small solder pads, and it came off the PCB incredibly easy. The irony is, I didn't need to save the original body and should have just cut the plastic. In the end, I cut the plastic anyway and spent a lot of time resoldering those small solder points on the PCB, which I did just off camera, so you get to see just the back of my hand. But I was successful, and the webcam, after quite a bit of work, did turn back on, and we successfully took the heart out of our donor. While I knew the very basic dimensions, it was only after opening up the original webcam that I could take precise measurements and import them into Fusion 360 to develop the specific design, and then eventually send those to the 3D printer. Really, the design and printing is only half the battle, and the processing and painting of the prints is just as, if not more, labor intensive. I like to use a half-round metal rasp to quickly knock down layer lines on flat surfaces, along with sandpaper and smaller metal files. The webcam was designed to almost entirely screw together with only the eyepiece that actually was glued on. This allows me to disassemble the camera for potentially repair, and also allows me to disassemble it for the painting process. This screw that attaches the top to the bottom is accessed through a hole in the very bottom of the body. I wasn't totally sure how I wanted to mount a fake lens initially, so I ended up just drilling holes after the print was finished. And here on the top where the layer lines were kind of the worst, I'm just using a little bit of a acrylic putty to smooth that out even further. And it's never a bad idea to double check at some point that everything does still work before spending a lot of time painting. And after sanding is complete, I like to give my parts a nice little bubble bath before heading to the paint booth. First things first, primer. Now I did print everything in black, and now I'm priming it in gray, and then I'm gonna paint it black again, but the gray primer fills in some of the layer lines, but also gives me a good sense of coverage, as does sort of that flip-flopping between the colors there. After the black, I hit everything with some matte varnish so that the black parts resemble the kinda grippy vinyl texture on the real camera and stand out against the parts that are supposed to represent silver metal. Now, as a bit of a corner cutter myself, one thing I learned not to cut corners on is masking. And even though I only have thin Tamiya masking tape, I am taking my time to make sure I'm covering every spot of the camera before spraying over with that silver. Well, despite my diligence, there were still a few areas where I needed to do a little touch-up with a paintbrush. But before too long, I was ready for the final assembly and laid everything out on the table. I'm sure I probably could have used a little more putty and a little more sanding, but I was still pretty impressed with the parts. And ready or not, it was time for the final build. Out of the whole build, only this eyepiece was glued on. I mentioned earlier that there were two parts that I saved from the original camera, the electronics and the stand. Well, I designed the camera so that the stand was held on using one of the screws that held the back of the camera together. I just had to drill out a hole on the metal stand, and it was held on tightly so that I could reuse that part. Well, that's it for this little webcam build. I think it really came together when that silver paint started going on. And I don't want to say I'm the first person to do this, but I really couldn't find another build when I searched around. To be honest, I don't even know what to title it. but it was a lot of fun, and I feel like there's a lot of potential here if people wanted to have webcams shaped like other cameras, or airplanes, or cars, or even cartoon characters, or something like that. But thanks for watching. Like and subscribe, and thanks so much for all of those who are part of the early days of The Quiet Craftsman.